Hey, and welcome to the final short lecture from Chapter 3 in your textbook. This time we're going to talk about bureaucratic theory, right? We talked about scientific management, and, and now we've moved on to bureaucratic theory. So, the father of bureaucratic theory was a German sociologist and philosopher by the name of Max Weber, right? This is Max right here. And Max was interested in studying organizations as sort of microcosms or examples of broader social, political, and economic processes. Also, I'll point out it's remarkable how much that Max Weber looks like Pacey Witter, Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek. I swear to God, they're like doppelgangers, right? I mean, they're the same person. So if they ever make a Max Weber movie, they should get Joshua Jackson to play him. Okay, so besides that, right, back to bureaucratic theory. So Weber was looking to explain the historical development of civilizations, right? So he's looking and he wants to see how civilizations came to be, right, and how they mature and grow, right? And he's doing that through a lens of political, legal, religious, and economic systems. And he's interested in how these different things work together to create efficiently or inefficiently running societies, right? So a great example of this would be his famous work, The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which is sort of a fundamental academic text that proposes that the whole idea of the Protestant work ethic, the idea that you should work hard because God is watching, right? Protestantism, his idea was that it encourages a strong work ethic, and that this sort of works hand in hand with capitalism as a system, right? If you work really hard, if you're willing to work hard, you'll get ahead, right? And if you're a Protestant, then you believe in working hard to begin with, right? So Weber took these different sociological forces and he looked at how they work together in order to create an efficient civilization, right? So Weber disagreed with Marx's emphasis on economics as determining everything, right? He didn't see that it was all rooted in materialism. It wasn't all related to the flows of capital and money. It had to do with all these other factors like religious beliefs and so on, right? That worked hand in hand, again, with these other factors in order to create efficient civilizations. So in his study, he formulated a list of different types of authority that have emerged over time in different societies. And so he came up with these different forms of authority. There's the charismatic authority, which usually comes out of crisis, right? Has a tendency to form unstable regimes, right? And usually are rooted in a single person. So charismatic authority, again, sort of transcends everyday life, emerges in crisis, and tends to be unstable. Then there's traditional authority, where the legitimacy of the people in charge is derived largely from tradition or custom. Right? You could think of a king, for example, as a traditional authority. And then there's what he categorized as rational legal authority. And that's pretty much the foundation of Western democracy. And so in this setup, there's sort of an allegiance to bureaucracy, right? The idea that the bureaucracy sets legally sanctioned rules and regulations, and then we abide by them, right? And generally, it's pretty impersonal, but it also helps to maximize efficiency, right? It's a really efficient system. So let's look at some examples of these. Whoops! So my video isn't here. You know I don't usually show them anyway. But this is a video of Adolf Hitler speaking, and Hitler is the perfect example of the charismatic authority, right? Hitler rose to power during a time of crisis in Weimar Germany, where inflation was out of control. Germany was being penalized by the Allies under the Treaty of Versailles for essentially they had to pay back all the costs that they incurred during World War I, right? All the damage that they caused to other countries. And so Germany was experiencing a strong financial and social crisis as a result. And somebody like Hitler was able to come along as a charismatic figure and gain control, right? Then when we talk about traditional authority, we have figures again like the queen, right? The queen, her authority is legitimated through tradition, right? Her father was the king, his father before him was the king, and so on. Her power comes from tradition, right? The same can be said of the Pope, right? Even though it's not passed on from father to son, there is a strong tradition within the Catholic Church that where people rise through the ranks to eventually become, installed as Pope by the College of Cardinals, right, according to a set of rules, and then acts as basically God's point man on earth, right, as sort of the one who communicates with God here on earth and runs that organization. So it's tradition that gives the Pope a lot of his authority, not necessarily his charisma, right? And then we see, here's an example of charismatic authority, Steve Jobs, versus, oh God, I can't remember his name now. Oh, Tim Cook, I'm sorry. Tim Cook, the current CEO of Apple Computers, right? So Steve Jobs was famously charismatic. He could make people believe in him and work really hard and do all these things, and he built up Apple. But today, the reins have been passed over to Tim Cook, who runs it as a very bureaucratic, rational organization where the rules, we follow the rules, right? He's not a really charismatic figure, right? He doesn't inspire the same sort of awe that someone like Steve Jobs did. But that doesn't mean that he's not efficient at all. In fact, he certainly is, right? He turned Apple into the most valuable company on the earth. So there's a lot to be said, obviously, about both kinds of authority. So Weber did critique this notion of bureaucracy, though, right? He described it as the iron cage of bureaucracy. So when you have bureaucracy, large organizations run by bureaucrats, right, you see an imposition of planning, calculation, and efficiency on things that are essentially natural and social, right? So what you're doing when you run a bureaucracy is you're creating a kind of impersonal environment. You have rules. Individual cases don't matter, right? If you violate the rules, you're fired. We don't make exceptions. And this helps large organizations work efficiently, but it also makes them very impersonal. So bureaucracy fuels capitalism, but it also limits alternative possibilities and essentially makes for a less fulfilling existence. It's just not as rewarding to work in a bureaucracy as it is to work under a different form of authority, right? And indeed, what we've seen is that this bureaucratic approach has really sort of permeated every aspect of modern life, right? I mean, all you have to do is look at the way people shop today. So if you go back 50 years, the mom and pop hardware store, or the mom and pop local store down the street, like you see those storefronts when you drive through downtown Barnesville. Those are all examples of what used to be mom and pop stores where people would go to town and get the things that they needed. Today, though, right, those have been replaced by these large bureaucratic institutions like Target or Walmart, where every store is the same, it's all laid out the same, they all work as part of the same corporation. The world has become institutionalized in a way that it wasn't previously. And so Weber critiques this. He says this isn't necessarily a good thing, right? So the legacy of bureaucracy. While Weber recognized the superiority of bureaucracy and its underlying democratic impulses, he also had a lot of concerns about the way modern life limits the richness and possibilities of human existence. And again, we can use Walmart as the perfect example of this, right? Walmart, even Target, these are really, if you walk in there, they're really sterile, sort of antiseptic environments. And if you walk into one Walmart, it's just like walking into another Walmart, right? It's not at all like what you'd see if you walk into a mom and pop store in downtown Barnesville, right? And so, I mean, this makes our life less rich in a way, right? It stifles difference and encourages sameness all around. So today, there are theorists like George Ritzer who carry on Weber's notion of rationalization, and they look at how bureaucracy has infiltrated our lives, right? He's concerned about the way that rationalization has led to the disenchantment of everyday life. where everyone is subject to a diet of calculated, mass-produced, carefully controlled, predictable experiences, right? Life is always the same all around. You go to one McDonald's, the Big Mac there is the same as the Big Mac at another McDonald's. You walk into one Walmart, it's just like shopping at another Walmart, right? Everything's carefully controlled. The experience is the same no matter where you go. There's no richness to it. There's no difference to it, right? There's difference is what's being lost here. And so people like Ritzer look at this and say, this is a problem, right? And we need to recognize it as such. So again, Ritzer looks at things like theme restaurants, right? Not just McDonald's, but TGI Fridays and Hooters even, right? Hooters. Trying to think of some other chain restaurants. I'm having a tough time right now. I haven't been out to eat in a year like everybody else. And he also looks at it in terms of education, right? He looks at the conduit model of education, which could really be called a vocational model of education. He argues that what colleges are doing is just churning out graduates with marketable skill sets rather than knowledge. And this, I submit to you, is a useful distinction. It's useful to understand education in this way. Because the whole idea behind the liberal arts education, even if you went to college, let's say 50 years ago, was very different than what it is today. What we see today is very much an emphasis on making sure that when you leave college, you have skills to work for somebody else, right? 50 years ago, the idea was that you were supposed to be expanding your mind, that you were supposed to be learning something to make you a better person, to make you a more well-rounded person, and to sort of expand your horizons. I mean, it sounds cliched, but it was much truer, if that's a word back then, than it is today, right? Today we don't make much pretense about people learning to expand their minds. When you go look at colleges, a place like Gordon tells you, oh, we'll help you get a job when you get out, right? You learn the skills that will help you get a job. And there's a big difference between that kind of learning and learning for the sake of being a civilized human being. And then I got a couple of videos just showing this kind of disenchantment in the context of theme restaurants and so on, and I'll let you check those out on your own if you're interested. Okay, well that wraps up this chapter. Thanks for checking this out.